I'm very excited to introduce another episode of our After Hours Screen Talk, and very excited about the film we're discussing today, which is John Carpenter's sci-fi film and directorial debut, Dark Star, which came out in 1974. He co-wrote it with Dan O'Bannon. It initially began as a 45-minute student film. Both, of course, shortly afterwards went on to achieve great fame and success. Carpenter with Halloween in 1978, and Dan O'Bannon wrote the screenplay for Alien in 1979. Dark Star is primarily known for its satirical take on space exploration. The premise involves this crew, the ship, the Dark Star. They're on a mission to colonize space, and they have to destroy these unstable planets to pave the way for future human colonization. And the way they do it is they use these bombs, these artificially intelligent bombs, to destroy these planets. But Dan, what was your thoughts about how it was visualizing space, or your first impressions about how it was depicting like the human colonization of space?
My first reaction was based very much on the radio transmission the film begins with, where we get this kind of deflating message from this, I assume, this NASA official who's telling them, yeah, we don't have the money for that, but you guys are doing swell. And that kind of sets the tone for certainly, I think, the interiors and all of the ship, and then all the malfunctions. You get the sense that this is space travel on a severe budget. The idea of planet Earth, and what's going on back home, that's virtually unvisualized, but that one radio transmission says a lot. Like you get the strong impression that the reason that the planets are being destroyed for colonization is because really Earth is kind of a has-been planet, and maybe a dystopian hellhole at this point. And the only, humanity has done such a piss poor job with their first first planet, that now that they gotta find other planets, other universes to colonize, and undoubtedly kind of make the same mistakes again. I was really interested in how this film anticipates O'Bannon's Alien, but then also looking ahead, the interior shots of the Millennium Falcon in the original Star Wars trilogy.
Carpenter came up with this story. Dan O'Bannon injected a lot of the satirical elements in it, and you can see those revisited, recurring again in Alien, like the idea of colonizing space, the human colonization of space, the xenomorph and the aliens in those films, the way they breed and colonize planet to planet is a reflection of what humans do. And also this like smug complacency regarding like these weapons of mass destruction that they're using. I mean, the complacency of the transmission control guy is reflected again in the crew members. They're utterly desensitized, like they're exploding entire planets, and it's just like, oh, whatever, it's very casual.
O'Bannon talks in some behind the scenes footage about the Alien films, that he's really interested in this idea of a used future, a future science fiction, future spaces that looks like they're actually functional, like they actually have a purpose, like people get in and use them, like they have been used. So by the time that you actually see this stuff visualized in film, the idea is they have a history. The future also has a past.
Like the ship itself it's very claustrophobic, cavernous, it's dirty and junky. I mean, the main control room, there's no room to walk. And I think it was intentionally designed that way.
And it's a human occupied, thoroughly used, lived in space. So you're really gonna get that sense. Connected with that too, as you're saying, though, it's very dank and dirty and claustrophobic. And kind of similar, like the sense of used, not only in actually being already used, no longer new, but also the sense of used as in used up. You really get the sense that this is an enervated space, and the people are kind of enervated and exhausted, and there's this malaise just haunting the ship and haunting the characters.
And also the fact that the ship is deteriorating in a similar way as the sentient bomb on the vessel that they use to destroy the planets. The ship itself becomes a symbol of the crew's impending mortality. Dan O'Bannon I don't know if you were aware of this, also was the visual effects supervisor on Dark Star.
Yeah,
And
it
he
was really
also, because of his work on Dark Star, he was handpicked by George Lucas to do some visual effects for Star Wars.
wow.
So the comparisons between the two is I noticed that immediately, particularly in the opening of the movie where they go into hyperdrive, and it's a very similar effect to what you see with the Millennium Falcon or Star Wars. I was impressed by what they were able to achieve in terms of like visualizing space travel with the low budget. Yeah, I was surprised by, again, like it has all that sci-fi absurdity to it, and then it has these kind of profound moments of existential pondering and philosophical discourse too in the third act, which we'll get to. But before we do that, I wanted just to talk about this alien scene. Yeah, well, what did you think of that?
Well, I mean, in light of having watched Alien and loving that series, I was just struck by how, even though it's completely played for comedy, and even though the alien doesn't resemble in any way the xenomorph of the eventual film that comes out, the ambience is there, and in that, the interior of the ship is very much like the interior of the Nostromo. The
Yes,
darkness and the bleakness
yeah,
is dialed up several decibels for the Alien film.
yeah,
But you can see the ambience is all there. The pieces are already there, and it just takes the slightest little turn of the knob to turn it from this sequence of high absurdity and sci-fi camp to on a earnest, unironic science fiction horror.
mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting to see how the germ for that is already there, and how O'Bannon almost like was already kind of thinking ahead to that in some way. That the film seems to be anticipating a lot of really meaningful pop culture moments in the near future. Not only Alien and not only Carpenter's career, but also Star Wars, as you say, because of O'Bannon's presence as a special effects person.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that whole scene was utterly ridiculous from the moment you first see the alien, which looks like a beach ball or inflated beach ball, which you discover, I guess, that Sergeant Pinback is this adopted this alien as a ship's mascot, as this like plaything, and
Hmm.
then he's in the scene in question we're discussing. He goes to feed it, and then it manages to escape its quarters, and then leads Sergeant Pinback through this like twisty turny series of misadventures through the ship, where he's eventually led to like a elevator shaft, and everything goes to hell after that. But the sequence lasts 10 minutes, or maybe even more than 10 minutes. It takes up a good chunk of the movie, and it's completely absurd and reminded me of the John Carpenter film They Live, and that whole scene where Roddy Piper and Keith David have that 10-minute fight scene, which is utterly pointless and absurd. And it's like, why is that in there? What does this have to do with the plot? What does this have to do with like character development or anything? And it's this absurd, irrational thing. And again, I think with the film satire and its absurdist tone, just with that beach ball alien scene, this is just kind of maybe representing this irrational, chaotic, purposeless universe that they find themselves in. You also find that the crew have kind of lost purpose, or even kind of forget the whole purpose of the mission, and some of them even forget their identities.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole idea of purpose and having purpose, these characters' lives, like you said, I mean, they're just completely evacuated. I mean, the setup for why they're out there is really tenuous. This idea, this conceit that somehow blowing up these unstable planets is an important step in actually colonizing space. How exactly? Like
Yeah,
how?
Yeah.
How is destroying planets, unstable or otherwise, going to create a better, you know, situation for eventual colonization? So it's really just kind of like a paper thin excuse for having these guys out here in this big clunky deteriorating ship, um, blowing things up.
Yeah.
Uh, and the
Yeah.
characters really seem to feel that absurdity too. So, and that's how they react. I think one of the things I was struck by most is how, you would compare a film like this to 2001, but you would also compare to um, Star Wars. It's kind of right in the middle of, in between the sci-fi boom that we get, the sci-fi fantasy boom. And unlike 2001, where there's this real sense of kind of rationalist, hyper technological purpose, where we're getting to the evolutionary cutting edge of humanity, our connection with the stars and with ethereal alien beings. Then you've got Star Wars with the kind of Manichaean good versus evil, the Empire versus the rebels, and it's almost like harkening back to the cultural rhetoric of the country during World War II, where you're fighting the Nazis and fascist Japan. Um, Here, it's like you said, it's Vietnam, it's the Cold War, it's this kind of uh, ambivalent, dismay-fueled atmosphere of ambiguity, where people are just kind of going through the motions, and there doesn't seem to be a larger purpose beyond just keeping up this charade that something meaningful is being done.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, with the Star Wars comparisons again, I do wonder if George Lucas had this film in mind for part of his concept for the Death Star.
Yeah,
But with the technological Cold War um, anxieties laced throughout the movie, again, you see these scenes of this utter detachment and complacency with the deployment of this, you know, terribly destructive weaponry, and which was actually a reflection of kind of the attitude at that time. And I think with the anthropomorphizing of the bomb too, it plays off that by having the bomb actually have artificial intelligence and be able to talk like a human or simulate human agency. It's part of the point of that is to make that point about the absurdity of our cold detachment and our use of these destructive weapons.
it really consistently keeps the tone focused on satire and comedy. I mean, the Carpenter and O'Bannon and the rest, they clearly aren't looking to depress us. They want to stimulate thinking, but all the while you're giggling and kind of looking at all this sort of like very dry humor and the absurdity and the camp, they're dealing with time honored, really hardcore science fiction issues, right? The overreach of human reason and technology. What would it mean for us to have been introduced to an alien species, and what would that look like? I mean, these are all classic sci-fi tropes. I mean, they're poking fun at a lot of them, but there's also, especially the presence of AI and how that all turns out. There's a real lingering question, a more serious kind of undertone regarding our relationship to the technology we have and the unpredictable ways that technology develops beyond our control.
I think that like moves us to like one of the most like unexpectedly fascinating points of the movie with the third act, which stages this absurd philosophical discourse between Doolittle and the bomb. What happens in the movie is that actually it's through this alien interlude of the film that there's a laser communication signal that the alien messes up, tampers with, and that signal is essential for communicating direction and orders to the bomb. And so they're put in this situation where the bomb is going to go off because they programmed it to target this particular rogue planet. But unfortunately, because it's not getting any signal, it can't deploy the target itself because it's a bomb and it's programmed to explode anyway, exploding the entire vessel. That gets us to the third act where now it's going off, the whole ship's going to explode. Lieutenant Doolittle has to go outside the ship and try to get this bomb and convince it to not go off. And how he does that is that we find that Commander Powell, who died on the ship, they've been cryogenically storing. And so it's never explained, but they revive him and are able to somehow telepathically communicate with Commander Powell. And so Lieutenant Doolittle was like, how can we stop the bomb from going off? And Commander Powell says, we'll teach it phenomenology. and so Lieutenant Doolittle does just that. He goes out to engage with this bomb and teach it philosophy.
I mean, they're dealing with kind of a phenomenology on the Cartesian register, which is to say that they're invoking this kind of speculative situation that Descartes set up for himself when he was engaging in trying to develop his scientific philosophical method. With Descartes, in that context at least, is how to be certain of phenomena. And of course, the solution to that becomes the rational subject that's the center of the thinking, reasoning acts of cognition. And so the phenomena could be illusory, could be stemming from illusory or deceitful sources, but the ego cogito becomes the only certain kind of like foundation in an otherwise unknowable universe. And that's the starting point for what becomes his method. You know, if I can't think it and reason it out independent of sensory data, independent of possible sensory deceptions, then I can't verify whether or not it's real. So, you know, taken to an absurd extreme, the result of that is what's called solipsism, where you think everything's an illusion but yourself. Which of course is where the computer winds up. Thinks that it's the only real thing and that its only reason for being is its purpose, which of course is to explode, which of course it does. What I thought was funny about that whole sequence, again, is this question of what happens when our machines become even as sophisticated, or maybe in some ways more sophisticated than we are. I mean, in some sense, that's the question that's already being brought up in 2001, where Hal, the computer, is the most human character in the film, the only one that has any sense of kind of humanness connected to it, and yet it's AI, it's not human.
Interesting.
I mean, I think that whole thing is very funny, though, because of the commentary on how a philosophical discussion can go terribly wrong, and how philosophical discussions tend to end up in this place where thinking itself becomes impossible. You logic yourself into a corner and you can't get out of it.
And I think that reflects back on the crew too. They've lost their sense of identity and purpose and meaning. They're hollow instruments of their function. Sergeant Pinback tells a story where you find that he is actually not Sergeant Pinback. He it tells his whole backstory where the real Sergeant Pinback, who was supposed to go on this mission, jumped into a vat of toxic fuel and I guess evidently committing suicide and going insane. And Sergeant Pinback just puts on this guy's uniform and then inextricably is put on this mission. And I forget what his real name is, but he's assuming an identity that isn't his.
I think the impression you get from Pinback and Boiler and their shenanigans especially is that something about the human individual has really been undermined and deprived in this space. And I think, again, it's hard for me not to think about the way the film is invoking the kind of Cold War, late capitalist paradigm shifts that are happening at this moment, where people are increasingly paranoid and disoriented and dismayed by the systems and the changes that are happening. And I think that one of the things people are feeling is like, my actions don't mean anything. Like, the real actions are being taken by these vast collective agents, these conglomerates, these governments this new global system that's developing, and the systems that are working within this system, and systems within systems,
Yes. Yeah.
and meanwhile, human beings increasingly seem like pawns or puppets in that context, uh, and the names seem to be a function of that, especially the idea that Pinback isn't really Pinback, that he really is this imposter, but at the same time is clearly doing the job that this other guy was supposed to do just fine. So the implication being that anybody could do it. So these guys are just kind of like anonymous, generic working stiff types.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
this could be like flipping burgers. They just happen to be doing what is apparently really important work in space. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Makes me think of another bit you learn about Lieutenant Doolittle, and you don't learn a lot of the backstories of the characters, almost nothing. And all you know about Lieutenant Doolittle is that he was a former surfer in Malibu. Like he says in the film, like, yeah, it was the best time of my life surfing. So again, like back to you were saying about the hollowness with which these characters' identities are portrayed.
I guess I just wanted to say just one more little bit about the characters. I mean, I think going back to the whole post-war theme, all of them with their facial hair and their shaggy haircuts, they kind of feel like beatniks out of the counterculture who've been subsumed into this emergent neoliberal empire, right? It's like, and there's this like, how did we get here? We were supposed to be fighting the power, man, and now here we are blowing planets up.
Yeah.
And I just kind of like,
Yeah.
especially, I mean, I recently read Naked Lunch, and a book like that, and I think a film like this, they're really kind of contemplating the failure of that counterculture. There was supposed to be some fundamental shift in the society that just didn't happen. Uh, the dominant ideology, whatever you want to call it, found its footing and pulled a catch-22 of some kind, and here we are, right? So you kind of feel like there's a missed opportunity somewhere along the way, but wherever it was, it happens prior to the events of the movie. The battle's already been fought and lost, and the film like this is really just about contemplating that failure. So as funny as it is, it's kind of a dark funny, because what you're doing is you're contemplating the failure of a major strain of the American experiment. That
Yeah.
things were supposed to actually get better. We were supposed to emerge out of this this fascist machine, more human and more enlightened, more inclusive, more everything. Never happened. Or if it did, it didn't happen. It happened in attenuated ways, not the way that we envisioned.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You get that back to Lieutenant Doolittle, who is reflecting on being a surfer. The surfer dude, like he wants freedom. No, he just
Mm.
wants to surf and get outside the establishment, maybe, and just like everything's groovy, man. Like screw the system. I want freedom here.
I mean, in terms of like what I thought of the movie, I really loved it. It looks very much like the student film that it started out as, so it's certainly not. It doesn't have that polish. But sort of similar to the film we discussed last time, The Evil Within, I think that's part of its charm, is that it has this very kind of individualistic, eccentric kind of quality to it as a result. It's also a breath of fresh air to watch a movie like this in the era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the hyper CGI driven extravaganzas, and how everything has to be $1 billion investment, and everything has to be cutting edge technology and look really sophisticated. The idea that um, this small group of guys at USC could, just decide they're going to make a science fiction film and blow up a beach ball and put some feet on it and make it an alien.
The alien was played by Nick Castle,
Oh, really?
who went on to play
Yeah.
Michael Myers. I don't know what he did whether he was the puppeteer or did the voice.
But on a deeper level too, it's nice to watch a film where you find yourself a lot of times just contemplating inaction. Very little actually happens in this film. It's really just the characters kind of like hanging out and lousing around and trying to figure out what to do with themselves in between blowing up planets.
Yeah.
It feels very much like a film that's kind of in spiritual alignment with Howard Hawks's Rio Bravo, which
Interesting.
it's one of the great westerns, but really at its heart, it's just a film where the characters John Wayne, Dean Martin, and the other younger guy, they're just hanging out and talking. They're waiting for something to happen. It's going to take a while. Eventually, it does happen, and then there's action, and there's the classic sort of western shootout. But in the meantime, it's just kind of like Dean Martin trying to kick the habit, John Wayne trying to like nurse him through the process of that, and they're
That's
just
right.
at this bar and they're just kind of like going back and forth. I mean, Tarantino calls that a great hangout film, and that's essentially what it is. It's a hangout film.
I was thinking of Tarantino as well watching this. And I had also read that Tarantino loves the movie. He actually called it a masterpiece.
And I think at its heart, this is what this film is too. It's a hangout film. Like, what do you do when you have these, when you're in this kind of like dehumanizing situation where human action is really compromised and purpose is really compromised? Well, you hang out. Uh, what can
Yeah.
you do? You hang out and you look for ways to kill time, and that's what they do.
Like there's a whole scene where they're in their resting quarters. Like you said, they're just hanging. You see their quarters, how shitty and depressing it is and demoralizing. So despite the lack of like depth to them or characterization, they still feel like real characters that you could meet in everyday reality. They just happen to be on a space mission.
There's one scene in particular in the interior of the center of the ship when they're about to blow up, set off one of their bombs, where the camera tracks backwards and like revealing more and more of the crew with their arms reaching over, and then it tracks forward a little bit during the same composition. And I just thought that was beautiful, because the film is so leisurely paced, because so little happens. You actually find yourself really being gripped by these moments of artistry that bring a kind of stylistic flavor to the scene.
When you first put it on, it's like, what is this? This looks like a crappy B movie.
As funny as it is and as campy as it is, I think there are moments of real cinematic beauty in the film.
Total respect to Carpenter. I mean, I'd like to see more of that kind of filmmaking today.
It doesn't get any better than Carpenter in that stretch in the 70s and 80s where he was just making these great genre films.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Shout outs to In the Mouth of Madness, though, in the early 90s. I think that's a truly great horror film.
Yeah, underrated.
Mm.
More than any actual Lovecraft adaptation I've seen. Like this one does one of the best jobs of actually giving like a Lovecraftian tone and atmosphere, at least at the time it was made.
Yeah, it's
Like
one of the few
that.
adaptations I've seen that actually nails the kind of the feeling.
Yeah, I loved it as well. All right, so hope you enjoyed this episode of After Hours Screen Talk, and well, we'll look forward to getting you more videos here. And yeah, again, let us know if you have any recommendations of particular titles, movies you want us to discuss. We'd be happy and open to it. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time here.